recording this for our internal use, and maybe we will upload it later for people who couldn't make it today. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Noura. I am the executive director of Cairo 52 Legal Research Institute and the lead research supervisor for this exciting new project, which I think you're all read about it, the MENA Trans Archives. And today we will have two sections, more or less. The first one we will talk about the data, brief overview of it, and then we will talk about the database itself and how you can use it and how you can access it. So I will just share my screen now and then. Uh, yes. So okay. So now we can happily start. So So first of all, like when we start talking about trans issues in the Middle East, North Africa, and here we refer to Arabic-speaking countries in the Middle East and North Africa. And while I'm talking, you can always put questions in the Q&A or the chat, up to you, and I will answer it in the end, or you can also just keep it for the end, like it's up to you, but we will have also questions in the end. So trans issues in Arabic-speaking Middle East and North Africa, we cannot speak about it without speaking also about intersex issues. Therefore, the presentation, the database kind of touches on intersex people as well and their rights, but not as in depth as the trans rights and so on. So first of all, like when we speak um, transgender and intersex people, there is always like the notion of Islamic Sharia or Islamic fiqh always comes like in very strongly when we speak about these two groups in the Middle East and North Africa. And the reason behind this like narrows down to a historical period during the Ottoman Empire and its territory, which was called Tanzimat or reordering, what happened exactly in it that the religious law, and this is relates to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all became only for family law and civil status law, while every other realm of law became like commercial or criminal, became positive Western style law. And this continued in the region after that during the colonial and post-colonial phase. Since changing one name and gender/sex in the civil registry narrows down to civil status matters, it became largely governed by Islamic Sharia because most majority of the countries follow Sunni Islam with some minority that follow the Shia, but also it is also governed by the religious code of religious minorities in the region. So it is important when we start talking to understand how Islamic Sharia, especially, view intersex and transgender people. And for that, like we need to first like come back to how Islamic Sharia functions. And this is an oversimplified view. I encourage you all to like go deeper in it, but like to for the sake of this, we'll keep it with the oversimplified view. Islamic Sharia generally is a very rigid, has very rigid rules based on the cis heteronormative binary that Allah created female and males, and each has their own rules in divorce, inheritance, marriage, governments, and so on. In early Islam, period before medical advances and so on, there were interactions in Islamic Sharia with non-binary gender or sex identities. And I say gender or sex identities because they also interacted with intersex people. And this interaction led to distinguish between these two identities into the social and the biological. The social was part of it, like different identities such as mukhannasin, effeminate men, mustarjilat, masculine woman, and so on. And the intersex was the biological, was called khunsa. And these two identities that distinguish was basically based on the idea that the biological is Allah's creation, and we as the servant of Allah cannot be like condemn that creation or like disagree with it. We have to tolerate it and we have to accept it. So intersex people were accepted in the Islamic Sharia more or less, but they were still expected to lead a socio-religious binary somehow. And scholars were very much focused on how to make them live within the binary, even if their sex characteristics are outside of the binary. Meanwhile, the social one were basically condemned, but not called for punishment as much. There was more calling for guidance and advice and making them realize that it is better to return to quote unquote their true biological sex. This distinction is important because it will feed into like the Islamic fiqh jurisprudence that was will be developed for modern day. Because when the 80s came, Islamic scholars again started interacting with the issue, and they were worried about one thing, that there is now new medical advances. They call this sex reassignment surgeries. Of course, like sex reassignment or gender affirming healthcare, like, and they were worried that such medical advancement will disturb their socio-religious binary, which is the backbone of many of their fiqh. So they attempted to regulate it by issuing fatwa, which fatwa is a religious interpretation of Quran and Hadith, to say who is eligible to undergo these new treatments and who's not. So basically establishing a criteria. And during this period, there were four main fatwas that came into being. The first one from three were Sunni, if like people are familiar with the two biggest sects. Three are Sunni, one is Shia. Sunni is the majority in most Muslim majority countries. And we have also, if we talk about like the Shia is in Iran, Azerbaijan, but like mostly Iran is the country that follows it the most. So we had three from the Sunni, two from Egypt Al Azhar, and one from Saudi Arabia Islamic Fiqh Council in 1981, 1968, and 1989. And we had one from Khomeini, which the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran, of course, which represented the Shia. And like it's of course important to understand how like the logic in here, like the fatwas, how they function. As I mentioned before, the distinguish already existed. So they already know that this is biological and this is social, but they also added two main fiqh principles, which are mainly talked about. Changing Allah's creation is not permissible, so it's haram, and medical necessities allow what otherwise forbidden. So, together with the previous fiqh on the distinguish between the social and the biological, they added this to the mix and started discussing this. And the conclusion was, and keep in mind, this was the 1980s. So, pathologization, transsexualism, transgenderism, intersexuality, all of this was very much like seen as medical disorders, whether on the biological or on the mental side. And this is basically what the scholars also view, that we have two identities that represent two kind of illness. One is biological, intersex, and one is like mental, not social this time, mental illness, which is transgender people. And based on this, they saw how we can validate the new treatment for them. And the conclusion most scholars have followed, that intersex people do not only have should be allowed access to these treatments, but should be obligated, because scholars believe that this is finally will be the solution that will allow intersex people to live a normal social religious binary life and do not disturb the social religious structures that in place. So it became obligatory. By some scholars issued that interpretation for intersex people to undergo. Meanwhile, transgender people were seen by the scholar as people already biologically within the binary. So Allah already created them and attached the correct role for them. So there is no need to like for them to undergo surgeries, and what they suffer from is a mental disorder. Therefore, conversion therapy or like is the solution. In any case, there was no discussion of punishment for transgender people because they were still viewed as people with an illness outside of their control. And in Islam, it is forbidden to punish people for an illness. So there was not talk about punishment, but again, that's the scholar's view. In a normal like human right view, declining like or like limiting the health care for someone is a punishment on its own. So this is how the source of everything will function in the region until now. And this is why it's important to know this kind of like of work as a backbone. But how like if like we and like this is from the database, like we will talk about it, like but this is we have 17 fatwas on the database, issued from Egypt, Palestine, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Kurdistan, UAE, and Jordan, and issued by a number of different entities, and we filter it through like keeping the fatwas that came from entities that kind of like have heavy religious scholarly reputation, which makes their fatwas more heavy in the legal and policy circles and so on. So in the database, we have 17 fatwas from across the region. All are 15 are Sunni and 2 are Shia. So there is this. But how do the fatwa looks like in practice? So fatwas are hold different status and different legal system in the region, but most of the time, like it is not a law, it's more of an advisory opinion. Even if it's a very important one, it needs further codification into law and policy. And law and policy in the region, this or recognition by the courts through legal precedents. So first, like in medical healthcare, it became like apparent that there is a move to codify these fatwas or the logic of the fatwas into healthcare policy or law. And two new terms were coined, and these are the terms that whenever you see them in the MENA region, like this is what they mean. Sex correction or tasheeh against in Arabic, which means basically the treatments for intersex people, which is permissible. And then they made a new term called sex change or تغيير against, which will be for transgender people, which is not permissible. So these are the two main terms that exist in medical law and policy. And currently, we have 6 countries that have medical law and policy that forbids healthcare providers from providing gender-affirming healthcare, but allow gender-affirming healthcare for intersex people. So not for trans, using the same logic that I talked about. And like example from these laws, like in Jordan, for example, you can see here, this is also from the database. You can like, after this, you can also go review it. You can see sex change, transsexuality, which is like the one that's forbidden, sex reassignment, sex correction. And then there is an article that says a physician shall not do any of the following: perform sex change, transsexuality surgeries. So it became illegal in a number of countries in the region. Egypt also have a similar thing that says doctors are strictly forbidden from performing sex change operations, while sex correction is only permissible after receiving approval and so on. Interestingly, the only country in the region that ever recognized quote unquote transsexualism as a valid reason to undergo gender affirming healthcare was Iraq, which can be surprising for some. But Iraq is the only country, and this policy, by the way, is still active, which makes it more interesting. But its implementation, no one actually knows how it was implemented, as it was passed in 2002, and a year later the invasion happened and the collapse of the government and the government services, and until now Iraq is rebuilding, and like things are not as stable to allow such an accurate assessment of how this policy actually looks like in practice. And moreover, now we have new attempts to criminalize healthcare. And then here we see the new attempts, like the law that was just passed in Iraq, still not signed by the president, but was passed by the parliament, that does not only criminalize this time healthcare providers from providing the service, but also criminalize transgender people themselves from accessing the service. And this is a new type of scope of criminalization that we did not have in the region before, that criminalizing of accessing gender affirming healthcare for transgender people. We did not have this before. So this is new legal logic that is being developed currently in the region. And in Kuwait as well, there is new attempts to criminalize as well transgender people from accessing gender affirming healthcare. If they access it, they became legally liable. So Iraqi law was already passed by the parliament. The Kuwaiti one was discussed. Still, we don't know what stage it is at now, but it might become a reality soon as well. is making like Iraq and Kuwait the first two countries that had criminalized access in gender-affirming healthcare and not only providing it as it was the case before. As for intersex people, despite the fact that we have, as I said, intersex people are obligated to undergo like surgeries, there is actually no medical policy or medical health care available for them. The only country in the region that actually have specialized medical care facilities for intersex people is Saudi Arabia. Every other countries have very mixed records on intersex healthcare. It's very confusing. Most of the time, an intersex person do not access equitable healthcare for them. And most of the time, even if an intersex person want to like really want to undergo surgery in adulthood, they still being gate kept because of the policies that are designed to keep transgender people. Impacts also intersex people who really want to undergo the surgeries because then they have to prove that they are intersex and so on. So this is how it looks like in medical policy. If we do speak a bit like uh, about like the legal gender organization, there is no law at all. Like there is a legislative vacuum entirely on legal gender organization in the region. There is some laws or like articles or policy that allow changing a name through an admin process or so on, but it does not talk about transgender people at all. And as I mentioned in the beginning, since this is a civil status issue, a judge must judge based on the religious code, which is most of the time Islamic Sharia, because it's a civil status issue. The only country that maybe doesn't have that is Lebanon, because Lebanon, they do have religious courts, but the courts responsible for reviewing legal gender organization requests are completely civil, not completely 100%, but very much civil courts. They are the sectarian nation of the country, so they rely more and more on justifications and so on. So how does like this like looks like in in the database. So we have 28 judgments, 6 for intersex people and 22 for transgender people, and they are distributed against like in the region as well, like Egypt, Lebanon, Qatar, Tunisia, Kuwait, Iraq, Algeria, Bahrain, UAE, and Jordan. And the 22 judgments are from 19 cases. And the majority of the cases, of course, got rejected. So we have around 74% of the cases did not were not successful in obtaining legal gender recognition in the judicial process, despite completing fourth hormonal surgical transition, which is a de facto requirement to even apply for legal gender recognition. So they are forcing transgender people to play Russian roulette with their livelihood. And one of the reasons why there is no law that bans or allow or even discusses legal gender recognition for transgender people is the fact that the focus is on banning medical care itself, with the expectation that if we ban medical care for transgender people, then they will not be able to transition. Then we don't need to discuss legal gender recognition because they will not transition. But of course, this did not work. Transgender people in the region are very creative and innovative and resilient, and they have like networks of underground networks to access gender feminine healthcare or traveling abroad and so on, but they still do not manage to change their documents. And usually the judicial logic in rejected cases mostly relies on Islamic Sharia, that like Islamic Sharia says this is haram, not permissible, then I cannot give you legal gender recognition. And sometimes they throw in some civil cases or civil reasons like you don't have a medical record, your medical records are not clear, we cannot really verify that you had the medical necessity to do all of this, and so on and so on. In the accepted cases, we actually have like only three countries with accepted cases. Iraq had one, Lebanon has several, and Tunisia had one. And most of the time, like they do justify it also from a religious and moral background. And most of the biggest justification that these individuals have already transitioned completely, and they obtain the socio religious characteristics of the opposite sex. And I say sex because there is no concept of gender here. We talk about binary from one binary to another. Therefore, if the court reject their legal gender organization request, it will cause immorality and social confusion as the person appears to be a man, for example, but their IDs are female. So this is actually one of the core reasons for accepting the cases. That like we need to do this to maintain the socio religious binary and the morality of the society or perceived morality based on their interpretation. Of course, there is other reasons. Usually, like they also cite human rights case law from the European Court of Human Rights, such as Goodwin versus the UK, the early case law from the European Court of Human Rights. And for those who are familiar with it, they know that this case law did not recognize transgender rights as much as is much like really recognize that a disorder, an illness, and this is why they still cite this outdated case law and not a new one because it maintained the narrative that this is a mental disorder and not an identity per se, which maintains the idea that sex is a fixed concept and you even if you change it, it there to like extreme medical conditions and so on. This is the logic in the accepted cases, even when one is accepted. For intersex people, there is only two countries that allow them to change their documents, and this process mostly in adulthood. So only two countries, Morocco and Saudi Arabia, have legal articles that allow intersex people to automatically change their documents, but only conditioning it on them undergoing surgeries. They cannot change it out of will. They still need to undergo surgeries, the so-called corrective surgery. Intersex people also suffer in legal gender recognition because in some countries they still have to undergo a lengthy judicial process, even though they are allowed, because the system, as I said before, is designed to keep transgender people, and the system is very fixated on this idea that they make sure that even if an intersex person exists and they want to do any transition or medically or legally, they still will be have to go through the gatekeeping that you already established. And we have six cases in the database, all accepted except for one. And the one that was rejected was actually interesting. And again, reflects the fixation on the social religious binary, that it was a case of a child who was 10 years old in Tunisia. Their parents applied for legal gender recognition with the court, but the court rejected the case after forcing the child to undergo medical examinations and so on. In the end, they found that the sex characteristics are kind of equal. There is no dominant male or female ones, so they said they cannot allow the change right now, and it's better to like kind of like wait or like until the child undergo further medical treatments or develop a dominant sexual characteristics on its own. So this is like an overview of how the data looks like and like what the data is about, basically, just for you to know. And this is like how like this is the website if you guys wanna go on it now. You can like either access it from here in the top or from here. And yeah, you click on it and then here it is, you open it, it's a map. And we have five categories. Country profiles have all the information: law and policy, criminalizing transgender identities, gender-affirming healthcare law and policy, case law, legal gender organization, Islamic rulings, fatwa. And then like we have key questions and key publications and analyze. And for example, like if we go here like on Egypt, this is how the country profile, for example, looks like. You have a summary, then information on legal articles and criminalization, the enforcement, the legal gender organization, like again, legal articles that may impact it, enforcement, gender affirming healthcare, again the legal article, enforcement, again examples, fatwas. And then like we have other right to education because Egypt had a case on the right to education, military service, and below here you have the cases themselves, other cases and the fatwas. And this is how a case, for example, looks like. You can see the litigation degree, the case number, the issue incurred, the judgment date, summary facts, judgment, and if there is a related judgment to it is also there. So you have this as like key information, and also like you can also see the fatwas from here. If you go to like Libya, for example, here you can find them. If you go to Egypt, for example, you can also like some of the fatwas are translated, the others are still being translated. And you can see here as well, this is the fatwas text, and this is a summary of the fatwa itself. And finally, together with this, like we did also like do two like reports or like papers that analyze all of this for people like who would like to go deeper into the data. And we have one on the Islamic fiqh on intersex and transgender people, and here it is. You can also access it from either the publications or from down there. And we have the second one here that talks about the judicial reasonings or directions on legal gender reconciliation cases. And this is talks about mostly only transgender people. So this is how the database is, and this is how it looks like in practice. So yeah, so this is we like, as I said, like we try to keep it short so people will not get overwhelmed by the information. So if anyone has any questions, like any inquiries, of course, like this database, we will be using it for future advocacy, informing future advocacy. We do engage in strategic litigation. So all of this data analyze of the cases and the reasoning we are using in like finding entry points for strategic litigation, as well as like informing research on the topic. And we will have future analyze on the issue, including the developing of Iraqi law and policy and gender-affirming healthcare from recognizing quote-unquote transsexualism until now, where it is became illegal to even be trans or illegal to have hormonal healthcare or surgical healthcare or any kind of gender-affirming healthcare. So yeah, if there is any questions, I see uh, how okay. Okay, Fawaz, like I saw your email, I will respond. I'm looking forward for our conversation. Uh, Distribution of cases per country. Yes, like the horizontal axis shows like how many cases exist in a country. So like some countries have multiple cases, some countries only have one. And this is depends on what we identified. Maybe there is more. I'm not saying this is the only data that exists, but this is what we were able to identify, and we will keep updating it as we go further with newer data. Okay, for Hazim, you're asking about what the future plans. As I mentioned, we are working right now on like connecting with like-minded legal organizations and creating a network of strategic litigation teams. And we already have started in Indonesia and Egypt, and we're planning on expanding it across the region to create a judicial pressure using like the entry points that we identify. And we will publish like soon like a strategic litigation guide that has all of the information on how to build a successful strategy. Of course, all of these strategies are not tested, so we are in the testing period. So we'll try, there will be a lot of try and error, but we hopefully we're hoping with a judicial push we will manage to like obtain more favorable outcomes in the future than the ones that we already had. um, Okay, non-binary, like because we focus on law and policy, we don't like, and law and policy does not recognize non-binary people, so we did not have like documentation on discrimination, but we are planning to like expand. We did have it in Egypt on discrimination, accessing gender affirming healthcare generally for trans people, but we are planning to also like replicate this type of research across the region. And of course, non-binary people is always included in it. It is just hard to like do like law and policy research and try to like navigate the very rigid concepts in it, because it's very rigid between the cis heteronormative, so there is no space for non-binary people. But of course, like we do document the discrimination that they receive and so on. And of course, if there is anyone who wishes to collaborate and learn more about the database or like how they can use it, we are very open for this kind of interaction. Um, and how long? So like how long it took very long. It was very long. I mean, collecting the cases. I personally have been collecting the data for the past 2 3 years, so it took forever to collect data because it's very hard to access judicial cases in the region. We don't have like open databases and so on, so usually just rely on your networks. And then like we worked like with a great team behind the scenes, like to get all of this out. So took us from like apart from the data collection phase, like it took us like around like 6 months to put this into a creation, which is like a good record, I would say. We did work around the clock to have the data visualized and easier to use and like not make it too complicated, not too legal, just so it can reach a wider audience. And yeah, I hope like yeah, like I already answered how do I hope so. Like yeah, the website is live. If you can like go, like it is live now. Like we had it under maintenance, but now it's live. We're still fixing a bit some stuff of it, but like most of it uh, is live now. In cases where people not. So like we actually have a second strategy. We do not only work on legal gender organization. Fawaz, this is for your questions about like people who cannot afford gender affirming healthcare, and we actually are suing the Ministry of Health in Egypt currently, because of this, and we're using like different arguments, Islamic and civil law, to like ignite that there is a violation of the fundamental right to health by not providing gender affirming healthcare locally through government health insurance for transgender individuals. So we are working on this angle as well. We are also like we are hoping like maybe in the future also like if there is Iraqi people around here or like Iraqi people, to also like use the previous health policy from the Ministry of Health to strategically litigate against the constitutionality of the new law. So we are also exploring the constitutional impact on banning gender affirming healthcare, and we are proceeding with already with one case against the Ministry of Health in Egypt, and we're hoping to get a positive outcome to make it like more equal because we cannot allow this kind of like a violation of fundamental human right to continue to happen. The 05 is just like doesn't like there doesn't mean anything. I think it was a typo from the graphic design. Like that's, I don't think like it means it doesn't mean anything. This was just like the graphic designer mistake. um, Okay, is it also more favorable to use EU and international law to pressure government, or is it prefer? It's not advisable to use EU or international law as the main argument. You can use it as supplementary argument that can work, but it's not the main argument. Courts in the region want to listen to not even Islamic law, as like you will bring Pakistan or Malaysia, which might have more favorable fatwas. For example, they want to hear from quote unquote the Arab culture. So they don't want to hear from like the West or like even South Asia. Like they want to hear from the Arab culture. And I use Arab here loosely, of course, not Arab as the ethnic city, but more Arabic speaking. So it's not advisable. We are writing now the strategic litigation guide, and like I advise you to like when it's out, like you can look at it, and it has which laws you can like prioritize, like which ones that are more important, and so on. Okay. I think like for Alexandra, I think like this database can also assist caseworkers in the West in making like quick assessment of the situation for transgender people in the region. It can be used as like evidence in someone's case, like they can access it easily. It is open access. They can know how bad it is for transgender people in the region, the abuse, the criminalization, the ban of gender affirming health care, and so on. So it can definitely assist caseworkers who are trying to do assessments of like transgender applications when going for asylum. So hopefully that will also be open for people to use. Yeah, the Sunni Shia question, like, yeah, like, I actually, like, yeah, like, because, like, but also the problem is with the Shia that, like, Khomeini has a fatwa that, yes, allows it, like, but Sistani, for example, has a fatwa that doesn't allow it. So, like, it's always the problem with religious law, especially Sharia, that is very flexible concept. You can't really have one concept for it, which, like, in the end of the day, it becomes what is the dominant one? Who makes the fatwa that makes it important for people to listen? And that's the problem that, like, we have progressive fatwas coming from the West, for example, but they will not find any audience in the Middle East and North Africa because in the end of the day they're not coming from like people within the position of power. Like it's the dynamic of political power and religious power in the region who holds it, and who holds it can issue the fatwa that will be impactful. Julie asking about like, do you have any other data or these laws compared to other Muslim majority countries outside the region, like Indonesia? I do. I do like it differs a lot, and this is what I just mentioned that they want Arabic culture. They don't want South Asia even. Like you can't even use this in courts. Like they do not like it, and that's the problem we have all the time. They want something from, for example, like in Qatar, there was a case in 2017 that was rejected that cited case law from Kuwait. So it's not even Arabic culture, the law, only this region. We want to cite each other and so on. So it compares heavily, like I would say in Indonesia, Pakistan. Chechnya doesn't really have like specific laws, like unless they just ban everything altogether. But it compares heavily with like Pakistan and Indonesia, especially since both are Sunni majority, which is like relies more heavily for a lot of countries in the region. And we are working also on like expanding this database to other Muslim majority countries, like and have like comparative analyze of like how it looks like in this setting or this. Okay, Hazem asking about non-binary and how they are treated. Uh, like okay, okay. So Hazem, like I would say, like non-binary people in the region still live within the binary settings if they want to like survive. It's like survivor mode, like so there is I don't think we have that like data on this, to be honest, like a non-binary placement in like in the workspace in the region. As I said, it's a very rigid concept. We don't have the concept of gender, we have a concept of sex. So the concept of non-binary is very far-fetched in the region as a discussion, outside of course people who like within the feminist and queer circles. So it's hard to have a data on it, to be honest, but it might be useful like to see how international corporations have policies international for non-binary people. How do they implement it in the region? That would be interesting for future research. But like for general workspace, I would say people just present within the binary. This is what I know from the research that we done on gender-affirming healthcare, for example, that people with now who identify as non-binary, they just choose one binary and stay with it as like as presentation, just to like have like higher chances of survival within the society. Okay, thank you everyone. I see like there's no further questions. Does anyone wants to add anything before we finish? We will also like share around like the database and and everything. And yeah, thank you a lot for being here. And if anyone has any questions, like feel free to email us anytime, and like we will follow up. Or anyone wishes to network on something, like we are very much available. So thank you a lot. And yeah, have a nice day then, like for people who starting early or for people who are having a nice evening. So enjoy your night. So thank you a lot. And okay, there is oh Okay. Hasn't like no, we don't have any research paper on this. Like we don't have a research paper on this. We have research on general gender affirming healthcare that you can access, but we don't have a research paper specifically on non-binary people. We usually just research transgender people as an umbrella, and non-binary people are included in the research. Like fatwa from Bahrain is don't Bahrain is usually like there is fatwas from Bahrain that like were not published on the official term, so they were not included. But I know there is some fatwas, but they were not any on the official from official channels and so on. Noha, do you think there's a knowledge gap existing in organization for services when it comes to trans rights? Yeah, for not for your coach. Yeah, there is a big knowledge gap, I would say, like between what the community faces and what the activists perceive as priorities. And we know this because, like in Egypt, for example, we did need assessment for again gender family health care, and most of the responses came back on the side that organizations do not provide services that they need, which there is a knowledge gap in this direction, and also there is a big legal knowledge gap between the or queer organizations or organizations who provide services and the legal realities of the situation. And this is why the database will come in like handy. We do have workshops and like we will do more lecture series for this, like to help to help us like mainstreaming the ideas with people. So hopefully this will also be of assistance. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you for the your thank you for you again, and thank you for the interpretation. And yeah, keep in touch and follow us. Thank you a lot. Bye.